So I'm Anna Fowlie and I'm the Chief Exec of the Scottish Council for Voluntary Organisations. So I've been really interested in the work of the RSE's Commission in terms of the findings about the voluntary sector and hoping to build on that feeling that we've had over the course of the pandemic about the really significant role that the sector has to play in Scottish society and indeed in the Scottish economy. So I was really pleased to read the report and get an opportunity to get a sneak preview of it, and I'm really happy to be able to provide a response on behalf of SCVO and really my own personal reflections, particularly in the context of a lot of reports having been published over the last 18 months. Just so what's this one bringing that's different and new? I'm interested in that. I think that what the report pulled out for me was the real kind of learning that we've had over the last 18 months, maintaining that feeling of togetherness, of unity, of common purpose and common goals that you get generated in a crisis. It's harder to sustain that when you're not in a crisis situation. And that real sense of collaboration across sectors and across boundaries has been really vital. And of course, the effectiveness of communication and trust and how important that is. And we really saw a building of trust, I think, and I really don't want to see that heading backwards in the future. And that sense that we were able to be much more flexible as a system and much more adaptable, and the real desire for that to become the norm rather than the exception. So the overall themes, I think, are really hard to argue with. So preparation and prevention, anticipation of societal risks and threats, citizen engagement and participation, and shared learning, I think really important. And of course, much better use of science, tech, data. It was really good to see that coming through. I would expect that from the RSE, of course, but I think that was really important that it was said. But I think what the report really acknowledges that a lot of this isn't new, and some of it's been around since the Christie Commission and possibly even before that. And that's a relief. You don't want lots of bright, new, shiny things. But on the other hand, it kind of highlights my current pet topic, I suppose, and that's the implementation gap. And it was really interesting on the day of the release of the report to hear the people who'd been working on it talk about implementation. And I think that came through in what they were saying more than it comes through in the report itself. And I've said it before, but Scotland's really good at rhetoric and policies, but not so great at putting them into practice. So I increasingly think that that's because the people that are coming up with the ideas are making recommendations for other people to implement. So where's the ownership in that? So I was really pleased to see that this report had recommendations for the RSE itself. So lots of things we can implement and not things that you have to implement. I thought that was a really key thing. So I think the highlights for me are recognising that the state has an enabling role. It should value and make the most of the expertise and capability of business, the third sector, communities, rather than trying to control everything or do everything itself. There's mention of social prescribing that I'm a great fan of. I thought that was really good. And that sense of needing an accessible evidence bank with an emphasis of that evidence being used in practice. I think that's really important. And much better joined up access to science and fact checking. And the focus on building resilience as well, I thought that was really important, and it was clear, it came through really clearly. And that having to have a more honest conversation about risk, a more mature attitude to risk. I've been thinking about that for a long time, and I think it's really important that we have that dialogue with the public. And I think that a really strong learning culture that comes across, again, you would expect that from the RSE given its role, but I think that that's really important so that we really include the learning from things that haven't worked. And that means we need to accept that honesty is okay, and that's really difficult for public services in particular. And not everything works everywhere all the time. So there's a couple of things I'm a bit more sceptical about, I suppose, and those are, for me, having a national participation strategy and centre, the foresighting centre, and the Partnership for Public Service Reform. And that's not because I think any of them are intrinsically bad, it's because I'm not sure setting up new things and new bodies without getting rid of some old things is really the way forward. I'd really prefer to focus on the implementation. We've got organisations, we've got reports, ideas, knowledge, evidence coming out of our ears, so we have to really do something with them, and that for me is the most important thing. And that means collective ownership, collective accountability, where everyone's expertise and contribution is valued and maximised. Yeah, I think that there's lots of evidence that social prescribing works, and there's lots of work going on in local areas around it, but I think that a more national approach is lacking, and not for lack of evidence, but I think personally it's probably around structures. So the structures that we have are ingrained and really traditional, and we still have a bit of, some professions thinking, well, that's not my job, that's someone else's job. Or they're just too busy. They think they've got enough trying to do what they do without thinking about this other thing. So I think there's something about moving to that focus on outcomes and focus on the person, and thinking, how can we kind of work the system basically to focus on that person and meet their needs, instead of thinking, what's my contribution, what's my role, and I'll only work within my own boundaries. So you see things like the deep end GPs who do amazing stuff working with communities, and we have a European project that we're working on in SCVO with partners in Ireland and Southern Ireland to look at social prescribing. And there's, as I say, there's pockets of good practice, there's lots of evidence that it works, but I think we need to break down some of those structural barriers and traditions to make it become more normal. So the Scottish Government's COVID recovery strategy has been very focused on collective endeavour. The Deputy First Minister particularly uses collective endeavour quite regularly as the way forward, and I think that's really important, and that is what we saw during the pandemic. And that comes back to the trust and relationships, but it also comes down to respect and valuing the role that everybody plays. And I think too often at the moment what we're hearing is the role of business and the real focus on business, and that's hugely important, but it's to the exclusion of others, or it's language that doesn't work with others. And the voluntary sector makes a huge contribution to the Scottish economy, never mind all the other contribution it makes, the social contributions, and I'm really concerned that to make that more visible. I really want that to become visible. So the sector brings an expertise that isn't present necessarily in the public sector or the business sector, and is as valuable. And I think that we need to recognise that and not think, oh well, if we've got a bit of money, maybe we can put it into a voluntary project. It shouldn't be about that. It should be a much more systemic and systematic thing. And we know that the public trusts voluntary sector, charities, community groups more than it trusts the state and more than it trusts business. So that's the way to access people that are referred to as hard to reach. They're not hard to reach. We are just trying to reach them in the wrong way. So that person-centred approach, that trusting relationships, is something that's an asset that the sector can bring to COVID recovery.